All right, the title of this session is What Do Patients, Carers, and Doctors Expect from Digital Technologies? So I'll introduce myself. I'm Sanjoy Datta. I'm a scientist at the JDRF International, formerly known as the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. We're a patient advocacy group supporting research and advocacy efforts globally, and work very closely with academicians, industry, other funders, governmental and non-governmental agencies, regulators, and payers. It's the whole 9 yards. I wasn't really counting to a T, but I was kind of taking a tally of the most used word throughout today's glorious sessions. And guess what the word was? Patience. So I think unanimously, doesn't matter which organization you're coming from or representing or attending, everyone's focus is to do better for the patients. So I think it's very well timed to have this session now as the last one before Colm and Tony come and summarize the day's events here. So thank you all for coming here. I have a privilege of reintroducing one of the panelists and introducing a new panelist. Matthew gave the excellent presentation this morning and is also part of one of the projects here. I will not even dare go through his achievements and accomplishments, but one of the key gaps that he's filling is trying to bridge the gray area or the less well-defined area between medical practice and mental health. So, and then I also have to introduce another esteemed panelist here, Mrs. Hilary Doxford. Hilary works for the European agency, for the European Working Group of People with Alzheimer's and Dementia. Unfortunately, Hilary is also bravely battling an early diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And I think she's doing very well here, and she will speak to us with some perspective. So, shall we get started? All right. Hilary, can you tell me what are your dream desires with respect to working for an organization that represents the patients, being a patient yourself? What would be the Holy Grail in terms of digital health that you would like to achieve?
Well, obviously the Holy Grail is to find a cure. Okay, thank you. It's to find a cure for dementia. That doesn't look like it's going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years. So I think what we have to start looking at in much more detail is to how we can help people live well with dementia for a lot longer. And the ways of achieving that are through, I think, through assistive technology, through a better understanding of the diseases, because we have over 130 different types of dementia. And I think there's probably a lot that are yet to be recognised. And I think there is a wealth of data out there from various clinical trials, research projects that could help to improve the understanding of what dementia actually is, how it works, how it progresses, what the pathology is. And I think the key thing as well, perhaps not a holy grail, but one of the things that the researchers are finding very difficult at the moment is finding the correct target groups for their trials because of the level of misdiagnosis within dementia. I will share something with you. I have a diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's disease. I've had 2 neurologists independently tell me I have early onset Alzheimer's disease. As a result of some research projects I've been involved in, I now know I do not have the pathology of Alzheimer's disease. So it looks like I haven't got standard, the normal Alzheimer's disease. I may have a variant of it that has a different pathology. I have all the symptoms, but not the pathology. So your friends go, that's great, maybe you haven't got it. And I'm going, hopefully you're right. But actually it's probably not great, because that's where the focus is at the moment, is finding a cure for Alzheimer's, with it being the most prevalent disease type. So yeah, the Holy Grail is to try and help people live much better with this disease in the foreseeable future. But of course, ultimately, it's finding a cure. And big data And assistive technology, I think, can play a huge part in helping us achieve that.
Thank you, Hilary. That was extremely helpful. And I don't want to pretend to know about Alzheimer's disease or dementia. That's not my area of expertise, but I think you hit the nail on the head, where digital health can help in the near term. We don't have to wait for that Holy Grail for a very long-term outcome, but can have meaningful impact on people living with the disease today, if possible.
Sorry, could I add one other
Yes, please.
point regarding technologies? When you get the diagnosis, you obviously look at what lies on the horizon and what's going to happen. I don't dwell on it, but we've obviously, my husband and I, we've obviously discussed it, and we know what is currently on the horizon. And there's one thing that stays with you right to the bitter end of this disease, even when all your functioning has gone, and that's your survival instinct. And of course, we have the survival tools of fear and pain. Fear, so we know when to run or stay and fight, and pain to tell us something's wrong with our bodies. That's going to stay with us right until the end stages of this disease. And what does concern me, or used to really concern me, was the problems with communicating with people in the later stages of the disease. People will be trying to help me. I will feel frightened. They'll be trying to help me. They'll be trying to reassure me, but I won't be able to comprehend that they're actually trying to help me or trying to reassure me. I just won't understand it. It will probably even feed my fear. And if I'm in pain, all I can hope for at the moment is that I'm with an expert who can interpret that I'm in some form of distress and actually manage to get to the bottom of where that pain's coming from, because I can't say, oh, by the way, I've got a pain in my side or whatever. And I think with assistive technologies, I think there's probably a lot we can do in improving communications with people in the later stages of the disease and helping them. It's really about having a good quality of life. I think that's what we all want. In fact, people with dementia are no different to anybody else. We all want a good quality of life, live as well as we can for as long as we can.
Thank you. Thank you, Hilary. Matthew, you had an excellent presentation this morning. I'll try to be complimentary. So one of the questions, because you covered a lot of ground this morning, one of the questions that was hovering in my mind as you were presenting is, what are the main gaps today in digital health technology with respect to at least your area of expertise? Is it the need of or a lack of a comprehensive 360-degree care at one center? Is it a lack of e-record keeping? What is it? What is the main, or what are the two main gaps you see in implementing digital health technology today?
Well, I suppose the first question is, the question sort of suggests that we've got there's a shiny product in a box and you're just waiting to unwrap it, and of course there isn't. We don't know, and Radar CNS is all about, it's testing a hypothesis, effectively. It's testing a hypothesis that these sorts of consumable wearables can actually give you something which is informative in terms of clinical practice. And it's, it may be that it comes out brilliantly, it may not. But I mean, taking a step back from what you're saying, I think that there's, this will sound, maybe it sounds a little trivial, but as a clinician, a doctor working in the British NHS, my first challenge in terms of digital is having a functioning desktop, let alone, smartphone technology, apps, all the rest of it. But the conditions which most clinicians work in certain, and I don't know what it's like, maybe it's very different elsewhere in Europe, but you're dealing with a sort of clunkiness in health record systems, which I think is fairly pervasive, and it's often a result of rather unresponsive providers of those systems who kind of lock providers into sort of contracts which are inflexible and quite challenging to move from. So there's a real problem, I think, about just some very sort of basic things like that. A lot of my colleagues, frankly, would say, I'd rather go back to the health records which I used to have, which were paper, because you could scroll through and you could find things immediately. Now, of course, quite often you didn't have paper arriving in your consulting room because the notes got lost. And the benefit, one of the huge benefits of electronic systems is they don't get lost. But I think one of the things we've been looking at very closely is actually the usability of those sorts of the health records. So this is, as I say, it sounds quite trivial, but it's really important. So we had hack days. My colleagues in the Biomedical Research Centre I work with have hack days where you bring in computer scientists and other stakeholders, be it clinicians or patients, and you say, what are the problems you're facing, how do we sort them? And very quickly you start actually being able to identify problems. At a global scale, I think the problem is that we then have the data coming in, which is simply not used, it's not available, and from the health record perspective, it's about the critical barrier is actually making use of very rich, detailed data, but is often locked in a health record in free text. And it's the text mining, the kind of natural language processing, deep learning kind of approaches, which I think are very exciting in terms of being able to move that forward. I think it's the health record component which will be the, in a way, is the area which is a relatively low-hanging fruit, because so much information is already there. I think then the other challenges are to bring in the user, seeing users not just as the clinicians, but actually as patients or people with conditions who can then interface with that in a more effective way. So I think the work being done on developing patient health records, where you can log in and see your recent clinic letters and what prescriptions you're on and get information about that. It's all about user engagement, which I think is critical. And then the kind of the what I've been talking about in terms of the sort of mobile health is, as I say, still something of a hypothesis, but a very exciting one to test.
Thank you. Wow, it's eye-opening. I mean, considering the very first point that you expressed as a gap is something that we take for granted is a standard in the clinician's office, but as I hear from you, it should not, it would be one of the first things that one would try to accomplish as a low-hanging fruit. So that's interesting. We unfortunately are missing one of our panelists who has taken ill. I'll volunteer to speak a little bit about the disease area we are dealing with, where digital health is beginning to be impactful already. And Tony asked a question to the previous panelists about a closed-loop artificial pancreas system. From a patient perspective, there are some other important factors to consider. We work for an organization for a disease type that's a childhood onset disease. You can get it at 3 months of age. It's mostly pediatric onset. There's a significant number of adult onset as well. So when you're talking about impact of digital health or how best we can utilize it in a safe and effective manner, one needs to consider, and I'm not saying we'll have a solution today, but keeping the patient in mind is to consider in a lifespan, when does the disease occur and how effective can digital health be? And the reason I wanted to sort of contrast this is in type 1 diabetes, which is mostly early onset, mostly pediatric onset, as opposed to a lot of the mental health and dementia, which is usually in middle age to older age. You can have a different patient needs. You can have different solutions. And so I think the whole community should keep that in mind while trying to find some common denominators, also then have these specializations built on it. That brings me to my next question, which I'll again go back to Matthew for, is what do you think could be some of the common denominators that one could do in the world of digital health as an expert, if you can comment, and then build in the layers of, for dementia, for cancer, for diabetes, for obesity, you can build in the extra layers for specialization. What are some of the common denominators one should consider in developing, in utilizing digital health for better outcomes?
So I guess, well, there are kind of two angles to this. One is about the kind of technical platforms, which I've already alluded to, and having functioning, joined up health record systems, which can be interrogated and provide information in real time and provide information to patients and carers and clinicians and health systems, enhanced by the sorts of technologies we've been talking about. So there's that sort of technological kind of solution, which I think could be generic across all of health. The other component, I suppose, is really what domains would you be interested in? What are the things which would be common threads between disorders? And I think Hilary's answered that question. I mean, she's raised pain, fear. I work a lot with people with chronic medical conditions and comorbid mental health problems, and it's depression and anxiety are incredibly common and very powerful. I call them psychomarkers rather than biomarkers, but markers of poor outcome. So if you have rheumatoid arthritis and you have depression, you're much less likely to respond to a first-line treatment. So there's certain sort of broad domains around, and this is why I'm so interested in this as a psychiatrist who works in a general hospital setting, is that I think it's very adaptable and relevant to people who are managing long-term conditions, and in whom you're trying to improve. Essentially, you're trying to improve quality of life. You're trying to improve disease management by helping with adherence, and I think that those sorts of broad domains ultimately looking at improving function, so people can lead as normal lives as possible. Thank you, Matthew.
One of the things, it's good that the entire world is becoming more aware, utilizing patient feedback in both clinical trial design and outcome studies. Regulators are beginning to recognize that. So we are moving in the right direction. Maybe we're not moving as fast as we should be moving. With that in mind, with the ultimate goal of improving outcomes here, Hilary, if I can go back to you again, with what you mentioned about one challenge being the communication. Can you just mention what are the main challenges as a person living with the disease or working for an organization representing the people with the disease? What do you think are the main challenges as a patient to utilize digital health applications, even if they were hypothetically available?
I think you've got an added layer of complexity with dementia, and obviously as things decline, your abilities are declining, your function is declining. I think, and here we go, I've forgotten the question, sorry. It happens to me all the time. I lose the thread, I start answering and lose the thread.
It happens to me too. So some of the challenges of utilizing technology, even if they were available to you.
I think here's something that maybe you could think about, is that my understanding of many of the apps are very focused on dealing with a problem. Now, a lot of the disease conditions have multiple problems, so you might have 10, 12 apps that could each help, each one could help somebody with a particular aspect of their disease. So rather than making the app applicable to a problem, you make the app applicable to the person, and you pull in all the streams from all these apps that are relevant to the condition or the problems that person's experiencing. And I think with dementia in particular, that might help. You've got sensory problems, you've got problems with seeing, you've got problems with hearing, you've got problems with processing information, you've got problems with finding your way. I mean, my brain now, the analogy I use is it's very like a jigsaw. And if I wanted to go from A to B on a route I commonly use, I am still working, so just my route to work. If I try and visualize that route, it often has bits of the jigsaw missing. I can get a lot of the route, but I've got a few gaps in it. And it takes me a while to fill those gaps in. I usually get there in the end. But interestingly, just more recently, I've been noticing at work when we're dealing with a lot of, I should just say, I do work for the UK's renal registry, which helps me an awful lot in understanding. I see a lot of cross-fertilisation of ideas between dementia and renal. And one other thing before I forget, somebody mentioned this morning about a dating app for rare diseases. We already have a renal dating app for rare renal diseases, so if anybody wants more information, come and see me and I'll share that with you. And I shouldn't have done that because I've lost the thread. The jigsaw, yeah, I get a lot of problems at work now because we've got several projects on the go. Somebody will come to me and give me a bit of information. And my jigsaw now, instead of having a few missing pieces, I actually don't have the jigsaw. I have a few pieces, and I'm trying to work out which picture, which project those pieces fit into. So that as things get worse, it tends to flip from having a picture with a few missing bits to having the few missing bits and then trying to figure out where they belong and what I can do with them. And I think, do you know what I need from technology? I need another brain. I need a backup brain. I need a brain that can, and actually, do you know, maybe that isn't far-fetched in the long term because, I mean, already they can make people see, can't they? They can put something that is connecting into your brain and you can see again. And if the technology understood my problems with comprehension, it might be able to help me solve them much more quickly. And one other thing I'll say, with dementia and any disease, you're always trying to find the answers. And with your apps, you're trying to give answers and things that will help people get to the solutions they're looking for. With dementia, we need two options. One is, yeah, give me the answer. But the other one is, help me try and find the answer. Because every time you do that finding for me, you're actually disabling me because you've stopped a neuron firing in my brain, so that's another brain cell that's going to die sooner than it would otherwise have done. So if, for example, I'm trying to find, my way somewhere, don't show me the route, give me some pointers or make me try and think and figure it out for myself. And that way, I will have better functioning for longer with dementia. So it's kind of like, don't give me the answer, help me find the answer. There'll be points when you've got to give it to me because I'm never going to get there, but don't assume that's what you should always be striving for is the answer. It's a mechanism for finding the answer that maybe we want. Sorry, I'm rambling. I'll shut up.
Well, no, you were fantastic. I think everyone benefited a lot from this. So in these points, I at least see two things there. One was the direct answer to my question, and the other very important point, which I actually took a note of here with respect to type 1 diabetes again, is, you know, life with certain chronic diseases, probably with all of them, is extremely complicated to begin with. And you gave me a good example of the digital health technology should again aim at better outcomes. It should not ultimately handicap the individual further and exacerbate the problem already. So that's an angle that I hadn't thought of. But with type 1 diabetes in mind, one of the things, it's a 24/7, 365 days a year. It does not take a vacation. You're continuously counting your carbs, dosing insulin, you're still at the highs and the lows. So it is a very, very intensive disease for the person with the disease, for the caregiver, and that's our topic today. You want to deconvolute that process. You don't want to make it any more complicated by giving them a very complicated digital health solution for the problem they have. So that's something I think we all need to bear, the researchers, the developers, the regulators, as we think through the process. With that, I'll come to my last question and we'll open it to the floor, and I'll go to Matthew for this. One of the things I had heard, Matthew, in a completely different context, not to do with digital health, is don't take a trial to the patient. Bring the patient to the trial. Take the feedback and try to develop it that way. As a clinician, as a researcher, can you just, speak on that point and how we can incorporate a patient's feedback into research, into clinical practice, into clinical trial design most effectively, so that we don't end up doing something for our scientific excellence, not that we're trying to do that, and then ultimately develop a product that's not going to be beneficial for the patient. So it's a complicated question, but I'd like your perspective on it.
I think it's about sitting down and talking, and it's an iterative process of engagement with people with conditions, and I think so. One of the challenges, one of the things I think is a real a real concern, actually, in any new technology is that what you do, and there's a lot of literature on this, is that when new technologies are introduced in health, they very often will increase health disparities, not reduce them. And the reason they increase health disparities, not reduce them, is because the people who are most able and competent, the people with type 1 diabetes who are, in one way or another together, they've got their careers, they're very good at managing their insulin, they may well be the people who are best able to use the technology and will get the greatest benefit from it when it's first introduced. And the difficulty, of course, is that what you really want, if you're a payer, is to ensure that the people who are not doing well benefit the most, so you can bring them up. And I think digital technologies have that capacity if they're well developed. But I think you sometimes go to presentations and people in a slightly hand-waving way will make huge promises for digital as being able to somehow switch off the kind of demographic time bomb we're facing in terms of multi-morbidity and strain on healthcare systems and so on. I don't believe that. I think that they may improve the quality of care which can be provided. They may be certain very specific situations where there'll be health economic gains, but those are only going to be realized if you actually develop the product with the people who are going to use them. And it's a simple, anyone in digital knows this, don't they? If you're designing what a smartphone looks like, you go out and show it to people. You do that kind of user experience stuff. I think classically, biomedicine has been rather distanced from that, which is why it's so good to be on a platform with someone like Hilary, because it actually, that change in the sort of the culture is absolutely essential if we're going to get this right.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Why don't we open this up to the floor? I do have a couple more points or questions for our panelists, but let's see what people in the audience would like to learn from the panelists here. The gentleman in the back with.
One of the important points I'd like to sort of feedback to Hilary's question about help me find the answer, not give me the answer. I think this is a very important patient empowerment. And the question is, as a startup, maybe if we are smart enough, we could come up with a disruptive solution to this. But our most difficult challenge is how to get that accepted by regulatory, how to monetize this innovation, and how to get pharma to incorporate this into patient outcome, positive patient outcome. So these are the challenge we face as a startup. We could incorporate all this idea, but how could that be monetized? And the other thing is, as the moderator say, how to bring the trial to the patient. The question, this is exactly, I think, very important, because this feedback is essentially part of this comparative effectiveness clinical trial strategy. So the question is, this is coming along, and digital health is going to play a part, but not everybody are on the same track. So I think the bottleneck is, as a startup, we could come up with all kind of gamification, all kind of multi-modality sensor, like what Hilary said. Don't just have one app that focus on one sensor. If the molecular data is treating multi-commodity to disease, we must have an app that treats multiple sensor, holistic way, capture 360 degree of the patient profile, because within this 2 to 3 weeks of continuous monitoring, with the correct monitoring, not just the individual patient, but how the patient is supported by their immediate peers. This social support, monetizing it, this is very critical for patient outcome. And how can we get the adoption by industry, by the regulatory? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. I think I found 4 questions in that question there. And I will encourage our regulatory experts here in the room, who was just on the podium here, to answer the questions. I'll refrain from answering those questions here, but I'll turn it over to our panelists first to see if they want to tackle some of the questions the gentleman had. Matthew, do you want to take first stab at it?
Not really. I mean, it's a very good question, and it's something which is being grappled with a lot, I think, in terms of what, and you know, with radar, we're looking, you know, really having to grapple with, are these medical devices? Does this count as, you know, how do you interpret that in terms of the regulatory framework? Is the regulatory framework going to be sufficiently flexible for innovation actually to be adopted? And that's one of the questions we're answering. I don't have an answer to it. I think in terms of app development, you know, is a very sort of, I mean, the problem is, I think, that there is, you know, I don't know what the figure is, but there's a absolutely vast number of health apps out there, which anyone can use, anyone can download, all the rest of it. How do you actually give yourself a kind of, you know, the added benefit of actually being able to say this shows some benefit? It actually, and I think that requires this kind of mechanism of having the sort of funding mechanisms which would allow it to happen in an environment and a regulatory environment which is sufficiently nimble to be able to, and in the UK for sort of health apps, there has been some work around that in terms of trying to get to the point where some can be kite marked, but I don't have a simple answer.
Right. What I'll say from our personal or direct experience mainly in the US, but it shouldn't be a whole lot different, is I think Alison Cave mentioned this earlier in the session, is I think one of the things is to go early during the planning process to the regulators and discuss with them, obtain their feedback, and this back and forth will help design the appropriate study for accelerated acceptance by the regulators, by the payers, and other things. I don't think I have a solution to the business model. That's something to be determined and not my area of expertise. But one thing I think regulators, certainly in the US and I'm sure in Europe and other places, encourages early dialogue. They're always available. To us, they've been very available to answer questions and troubleshoot with us. So I think we're all in it together. So one of the things I'll encourage small companies like probably yours to do is this early engagement, and then be part of, as Matthew was saying, part of these networking ability. And we discussed this yesterday at a session that I was part of, is the huge leverage here. It's not just financial leverage. When you join teams like the IMI or other consortia, you leverage the expertise, the patient pool, the cohorts, and several other things there. And so you get a bigger bang for your buck in that case. And then I think you can solve that problem there. Hilary, did you have a response to the gentleman's question?
Very much what you've said, and I am involved in research work in my working life, and the one area I know very little about is the regulators and the payers. And I feel that we're always saying involve patients throughout the research life cycle. In every stage of the research life cycle. Now, I'm not sure that the regulators sit within the research life cycle. They're beyond the point of research, but are they involving, and I'm saying this because I don't know, I would hope they're involving patients and patient organisations to help inform their decisions, because I did attend a regulators meeting 2 years ago, and it was very interesting at how risk averse they were. And when you're a patient with not long to go, I mean, I've hopefully got quite a long time to go, but when I was diagnosed, I was told I'd have 18 months to 2 years before I would need a lot of support, and they got that wrong. But at that point in time, I would have done pretty much anything to try and prolong that 2 years. And the regulators, I understand why they're so risk averse, but I think it shouldn't be a yes, no. I think it needs to be a qualified yes, no, and in these circumstances, okay. And I think I heard on the news in the last few weeks that they are now changing their approach so that people that really have nothing left then they will try the higher risk drugs or solutions to help them. I don't know, but I do think it's about talking. Not just talking and then doing something about it afterwards, but involving the key players. None of us likes being told what to do. You know, we all want to feel we're involved and taken along. So I wouldn't dream of sort of telling any of you what to do. But likewise, I don't want you telling me what to do. Can we all do it together? And then hopefully we get the right outcome for everybody, because everybody adds value to a life cycle.
Any other questions? The lady there.
Well, maybe it's just I want sort of some advice for my existential crisis here. So, ASPA UK is both a medical research funder, and we also provide digital services for patients. So when we're doing our provision of digital services, we're very much using a user experience, user-centered design, very much working with digital agencies, and much more in the sort of consumer space. And then when we fund research, which might be a digital health app, it's going through the very traditional research governance processes, peer review. And actually what we're hearing from people is they want a mix of both, because people want that sort of surety that for them they would say it's been through an NHS process. But what they mean is they want the rigour, but they also want the user-centred design, which doesn't lend itself to conventional research processes. And although we're seeing some good things now with maybe the traditional medical researchers working with the technology researchers, we're not seeing the consumer agency piece coming in at all, who actually are at the cutting edge of this. And it's just, it feels like what's the role of everybody here to bring those very different cultures together? Because actually we sit in rooms and it ends up going into different camps, and it's not. It's just shades of the same user-centred, patient-centred design process. And I just wondered how that's playing itself out for you or anybody in the room.
Nancy, you want to take it through?
Well, I agree. I don't think I've got a. I don't think I can add to what I've said already about, you know, I'm agreeing in terms of the necessity of getting that issue process right. Maybe we don't do enough of actual, you know, direct user design. But I'd be happy to talk. I'd be interested to hear afterwards.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It is a very prevalent problem, and doesn't matter which disease area you're working in, where there's this dichotomy or a silo, and sometimes the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. But I think that gap is being slowly bridged now. There's more, I wouldn't say it's perfect, it's far from perfect, but there's a lot of consumer interaction now in the design of a lot of research. At least I'm more familiar with metabolic diseases there, where there is a lot more interfacing now between them as well as with the patient community here, especially in the role that we play at JDRF. It's coming to a centralized way of doing things. But yes, still research is research, and it's viewed with a different pair of lens compared to a product development here. And so we have to bridge that gap. But it's a very good point you raise. I don't think I have a crystal ball on that, but I think something for all of us to take home and work on, probably, you know, to think about this. Will that be the last question then?
I have a question with regard to patients that are neither technological savvy or are unable to share their data with medicals. Is it planned in a way to gather their data by analysis of their motion, voice, so regardless if they can type or can do anything, you know, voluntarily, it's just by observing them and trying to foresee, knowing their profile, if something bad happens or might happen soon. Is that kind of research also in this direction? So because there is a group of persons that might be not able to do it, or might not just have mobile phone, Facebook? I mean, what with those group? I mean, this group might be quite significant. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Hilary, do you want to take that on?
Yeah, you are right. That group is significant, especially with dementia. And I know the Alzheimer's Society in the UK and actually the UK government, and I'm involved in a couple of projects how we can be in contact with the hard-to-reach groups, whether it's through their disease and they're not able to communicate, whether it's geographic issues, whether it's a cultural issue, because there are all different problems. And you're absolutely right. They're probably the ones. I mean, I'm in quotes an engaged patient, but there's a lot of people that just don't realise. Actually, I think involvement is a therapy in itself. It certainly helps keep me going. And I've seen many of my friends who've been 10, 15 years now with a diagnosis, and because they're active and involved, they're doing okay. And I just feel that we've somehow got to reach out. In fact, I think education and awareness of what patients can do and what patients can be involved in is so important. And the needs, I also have a thing about sharing data. I'm happy to share my data. Anybody wants my data, you can have it. I don't care. And I also believe that this is my view, the needs of society outweigh the rights and needs of the individual. And I actually think the individual in the long term will benefit. If society has benefited, it will come back and pay dividends to the individual. But I know other people have different views. But I do think there's been too much negativity, especially in the UK, maybe not across Europe, about, it's been touched on frequently today, and I've loved what I've heard, because I agree with just about everything I've heard. But people, we need to just, everybody that's against data sharing, we just need to get them and say, okay, tell us why, and we'll tell you why it's beneficial to share data. There's always going to be bad people in the world, you know, who are going to abuse things, but that should not, it's more good going to come out of upsetting a few people than being so careful, so risk-averse, doing everything, well, everything so that you cannot do anything. You're physically constrained by all the rules and regulations. Where does that get us? I just don't think it gets us anywhere. Somebody told me the other day I'm a Marxist. I don't know, I've got to go and read up on his philosophy, but maybe I am.
Right. But I think it is a good question, and that's the point that all three of us had raised in the beginning, that when we develop something, keep the end user in mind. And there may be people especially in the far ends of the age groups, older people and very younger people, like the pediatric disease we deal with, that may not be in a position to use it, may not be savvy to use it, may not have access to it. So I think we will never have a one-size-fits-all solution for any therapy or including digital therapies. But I think even if we can do the greatest good for the largest number, that is a success in and by of itself. I think this was a good session here. And did you have one burning question? Okay, make it quick and make it short, and we'll try to give a short answer. Because Colm has me on the clock here.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize the fact that when we talk about involving the end users, in particular certain disease, we need also to consider the caregivers, the family around the individuals, and not just that individual that sometimes we forget, actually.
The ecosystem, absolutely. And in most of these chronic illnesses, there's an ecosystem involved here. I really want to thank our panelists. Hilary, I think, takes the cake today, and Matthew as well. For the excellent discussion here. Thanks, everyone. And